Welcome to the show. Today we are taking a deep dive into an article at baffledbyscience.com entitled Hot Climate Models. Unrealistic assumptions are undermining public trust in climate action.
This could be a challenge.
Oh yes, how we respond globally and locally to climate change, it all depends on computer models.
That's right, they're vital.
But how well do our listeners really understand these models? That's our mission today, digging into the limits, the assumptions, and well, better understanding how scientists and others communicate the results.
And what's fascinating, I think, is that while indispensable, there's this growing discussion now about their shortcomings. Okay, two things really stand out, and they're linked. The hot model problem, as some people call it, and then how this one scenario, RCP 8.5, gets used or maybe misused.
Right, we hear about climate models all the time, but for someone like you looking closely at this, what's the basic thing people often get wrong about what they actually do?
Yeah, that's crucial. Fundamentally, they're incredibly complex computer simulations running mathematical equations that describe Earth's climate, greenhouse gases, oceans, the works.
But the big misunderstanding?
IPCC models don't give forecasts, not like a weather forecast saying rain tomorrow.
Okay, not a prediction then.
Exactly. They generate scenarios. They're based on assumptions about our future emissions, our activities. It's more like if we follow path A, this might happen, not this will happen.
Okay. And that's where these RCPs come in, representative concentration pathways. They describe different paths that we might take.
Precisely. They provide the framework. So RCP 8.5, that's the really high one. It imagines a future with extremely high emission.
And the others?
Then you got others like RCP 4.5, that's more moderate, or even RCP 2.6, which assumes very low emissions.
So understanding the what is step one, but the real deep dive starts when we look inside the recent controversies. First up, this hot model problem. What's going on there?
And this really jumped out with the latest batch, the so-called CMIP 6 models. Some of them started projecting significantly higher warming. We're talking about equilibrium climate sensitivity, or ECS. That's basically how much warming you'd expect if CO2 doubles in the atmosphere, a key number.
And these hot models?
They pushed climate sensitivity way up into the 4.5 to 5.7 degrees C range. That's a big leap from the historical estimates, which were close to 3 degrees C. It suggests a much, much more sensitive climate system.
Wow, what caused that jump in those specific models? What was the mechanism?
Often it boiled down to exaggerated cloud feedbacks.
Cloud feedbacks?
Yeah, how clouds react to warming. In these models, clouds sometimes reacted in a way that amplified the warming too much, especially by reducing low cloud cover. Those clouds usually cool the planet by reflecting sunlight.
So they got the clouds wrong, essentially.
In a way, yes. They seem to overestimate that particular feedback loop. Now, the IPCC did try to account for this. They used observational weighting, giving more weight, more credibility to models that matched actual past observations better. But, the existence of those high sensitivity models, it still fuels debate.
And critics jumped on this.
Oh, yes. People like Judith Curry, Roy Spencer, John Christie, they've used this to challenge the overall credibility, suggesting the climate system might actually be much more stable than many models suggest.
Okay, so that's the models, but then there's how we run those models, the scenarios. Let's get into RCP 8.5. What was it originally meant to represent?
It was designed as an extreme case, a plausible but very high-end, maybe worst-case scenario.
Based on what assumptions?
Things like global energy staying dominated by coal, very little climate policy action, continued rapid population growth, and kind of slow technological progress on alternatives, really stacking the deck for high emissions.
But the controversy isn't just that it's extreme, it's how it's been talked about, right, as business as usual.
Exactly. That's the nub of it. Many media reports, some advocacy groups, they started presenting RCP 8.5 as the default path, the if we do nothing scenario.
And the problem is?
Well, critics like Zeke Housefather and Glenn Peters, they've argued that's just misleading now. Given current trends, renewables getting cheaper, coal use actually plateauing or falling in many places, that trajectory looks increasingly, well, improbable.
So it's not business as usual anymore?
Not really. Ross McKittrick calls it a scare story. Roger Pielke Jr. argues pretty strongly it shouldn't be used as a baseline anymore. Where we actually are now globally looks much closer to RCP 4.5 or maybe even a bit lower.
So neither side of the argument is happy with this approach?
Indeed.
Yep, okay, but there must be a counter-argument. Why keep using it at all?
The defense generally is that you need a range of scenarios to capture all the uncertainty. The ensemble, the average of many models, could be robust, especially if you downweight those hot models.
And they argue RCP 8.5 is still useful for stress testing, like helping policymakers plan for really high impact, even if low probability risks, preparing for the worst just in case.
But does that defense hold up?
Well, one critique is whether policymakers really grasp the low probability part.
It's like planning your day based on a weather forecast for rain and then having to carry your umbrella around all day even though it didn't rain in the end.
Yes, to understand this in climate policy terms, imagine that your umbrella weighs several tons.
Indeed. Not something you want to do unless you absolutely have to.
And there's a deeper issue, kind of a gaping hole, in how we validate models. Current hindcasts check if models reproduce past climate trends, that's good, but they don't really check how well previous models predicted what actually happened after they made the prediction.
So we don't know how good the older forecasts actually were.
We don't systematically check that, so policies based on those older projections, maybe you should view them with a bit more caution.
So given all this complexity, for you listening, how should we think about these projections? How should they be used in policy?
I think clarity is just paramount. Communicators need to be really precise. Describe RCP 8.5 for what it is. A high-end, low probability scenario, not the most likely outcome. And for policymakers, they really need to consider the whole range of scenarios and, importantly, weigh them by likelihood. Not just fixate on the worst possible case. And finally, just more transparency about the limits, the uncertainties, the disagreements. That's vital for a healthier debate.
Okay, so wrapping this up, climate models, these scenarios, they're absolutely essential tools. We need them. But like any tool, they've got limitations.
Right.
Some recent models, those hot models, likely overstated warming because of specific technical issues like clouds. And RCP 8.5 doesn't look like a plausible business as usual anymore, even if it has some value for exploring extreme risks, preparing for the worst, just in case.
Exactly. And the final thought maybe is this: balancing genuine concern about climate change with a realistic assessment of the tools and scenarios.
That isn't denialism, it's just prudent science.
Yes, it should ideally lead to better, more robust policy. Ultimately, it could even enhance the credibility and effectiveness of how we communicate about climate change.
So perhaps something for you, the listener, to consider. How does acknowledging these nuances, the model limitations, the scenario debates, change your understanding when you next encounter climate projections or policy discussions?
Great question.
That wraps it up for now. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the complexities of climate models and scenarios. We hope it gives you a clearer picture of these critical issues.
And do visit baffledbyscience.com to read the original article.
And as always, we encourage you to keep exploring, keep questioning, and stay informed. Until next time.